Developing right now on Morning News Now, Stormy Daniels back on the stand in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial. This morning, the adult film actress set to return to a New York courtroom after an explosive day of testimony earlier this week. All this while an appeals court in Georgia considers Trump's appeal of a judge's decision to keep District Attorney Fani Willis on his election interference case. We have team coverage. Also this morning, pressure and pushback over Israel's military offensive in Gaza. President Biden vowing to stop sending weapons to Israel if Israeli forces enter Rafah.
If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah.
This as negotiations stall for a ceasefire in Gaza. We'll bring you the latest. Plus, path of destruction, millions of people waking up to what's left of their homes and neighborhoods after another round of devastating storms slammed several states with heavy rain, wind, even tornadoes. And the threat continues this morning. We are tracking it all. And Generation IOU, a startling new study showing Gen Z is much deeper in debt than millennials were at their age. We'll break down the numbers, plus what you can do to get out of debt. We'll give you some important tips.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Christine Romans in for Joe Fryer this morning.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks for getting your Thursday started with us. We're going to begin our show this morning right here in New York City with our ongoing coverage of former President Donald Trump's criminal hush money trials.
Stormy Daniels due back on the stand for further cross-examination by Mr. Trump's defense team. On Tuesday, the adult film actress delivered an extraordinary, sometimes explicit and uncomfortable account of her alleged sexual encounter with Mr. Trump back in 2006. The former president, of course, denies the incident and the charges of falsifying business records to hide an alleged hush payment he made to her in the run-up to the 2016 election. All this comes amid new developments in the Georgia election interference case. A court there is considering an appeal from Mr. Trump challenging the judge's decision to not disqualify Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis from overseeing that case. Willis was accused of misconduct for allegedly benefiting from her relationship with Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard is outside the courthouse. We're also joined by our legal analyst, Danny Ceballos. Good morning to both of you. Vaughn, let's start with you and the hush money trial this morning. What can we expect from today's proceedings after that stunning testimony from Stormy Daniels on Tuesday?
Right. It was a full day of testimony, and cross-examination from Donald Trump's attorney began in the afternoon, and that's where they left off, and that's where they'll be picking up this morning, with Donald Trump's own attorneys further asking questions of Stormy Daniels. We should note they have yet to ask her about the specific events about the night that she alleged a sexual encounter in 2006 in Lake Tahoe with Donald Trump. At this point in time, Donald Trump publicly over the years has issued a blanket denial about the events that took place that very night. But then Stormy Daniels, in testimony on Tuesday, laid out very vividly the extent to which, after meeting him that afternoon, she went to his hotel that night and they had sex. And then ultimately, for weeks to follow, and then even into 2007, they had multiple meetings and phone calls, potentially even to talk about her appearing on The Apprentice. And Donald Trump, again, publicly has denied this, yet inside of the courtroom in front of this jury, it's a different story. And we could expect the attorneys for Donald Trump to ask her further questions about the specifics, because what they were doing was trying to call into question her credibility in her recollection of the events in front of this jury.
Danny, let's bring you in here. We asked you this yesterday, but again, after another day of testimony, based on what you've heard so far, has Stormy Daniels really been a better witness for the prosecution or the defense?
The prosecution. I mean, they called her, so they knew she was going to be helpful. But in a sense, the evidence that she offered on the elements of the crimes, in my view, is minimal. The evidence she offered in terms of prejudicial and damaging testimony about just general ickiness of Donald Trump, that was a huge help to the prosecution. But that is also why the defense moved for a mistrial, because they said it was too prejudicial and it didn't have anything to do with the underlying case. So as we sit here today, Stormy Daniels has been a net benefit for the prosecution. But if there's a conviction and in a year and a half or so this case is overturned, then I'll come back and say, well, then the net benefit was to the defense.
Vaughn, let's switch to the Georgia election interference case for a moment. We know now a court will consider Trump's appeal challenging the judge's decision to not disqualify the Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis from this case. Remind us what this is all about and what this appeal could mean to the case's timeline.
Right. This challenge by Donald Trump of Fani Willis, a district attorney prosecuting this case, has already significantly delayed this trial from beginning. This is an issue where Fani Willis, the district attorney, hired Nathan Wade, who is a special prosecutor, and it was found that the two had at one point a romantic relationship. And Donald Trump's attorneys challenged that there was a conflict of interest and making the case that Fani Willis had a financial interest in moving this case forward and having the special prosecutor Nathan Wade bring charges against Donald Trump and the other defendants in this Georgia case. What we saw was the Judge McAfee overseeing this case, had a hearing in which he heard the arguments from both sides on this, ultimately made a determination that led to Nathan Wade, that special prosecutor, leaving the case, but kept Fani Willis on board. And now what yesterday's decision from the appeals court did allows Donald Trump to file a notice of appeal within the next 10 days. Donald Trump's attorney indicated that they will, in fact, appeal this. So there is no trial beginning date yet here for that Fulton County election interference case, and it's unlikely we'll see it before November's election.
Danny, what would Trump's team need to prove in order to get this decision overturned? And then also, if appeal is successful, where does it leave the Georgia case? What happens from there?
Yeah, essentially, they're arguing that the judge erred in his decision. And I think what helps the Trump team is that there's such a gigantic body of evidence that was put into the evidentiary hearing that there's plenty of at least data information for an appeals court to hang a decision on. And in that decision, Judge McAfee did make findings that help the Trump team. In other words, even though he didn't ultimately find in favor of them, he did find essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, that something was afoot, that there was this appearance possibly of impropriety. And those are the kinds of things that an appellate court will look at and possibly go the other way, depending on the standard of review that they apply.
All right, Vaughn, Danny, thanks so much. A lot going on in the Donald Trump legal orbit. Thank you.
Well, certainly. Well, President Biden is pushing back against Prime Minister Netanyahu's plan to carry out a controversial military offensive in Rafah.
That's right. The president says the U.S. will not supply certain weapons to Israel should they choose to go through with that raid. Tens of thousands of Gazans, of course, have fled to Rafah for shelter after Israel carried out ground offenses in the north. Israeli troops have already seized border crossings in Rafah, though they have yet to enter the city. President Biden says the U.S. will not aid in that assault.
NBC News White House correspondent.
Civilians killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs and other ways in which they go after population centers. And I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem.
NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins us with more on this. Monica, good morning. So President Biden has said Israel has already used those 2,000-pound bombs to kill Palestinian civilians. Are those the same types of bombs the administration delayed shipping last week? Do we have any indication if this possible delay is going to extend now to other kinds of weapons and ammunition?
It's certainly possible, Savannah, and yes, it is significant that for the first time in the course of this war, something that the U.S. had threatened was possible. They did pause the shipment and sale of some of those weapons, including those 2,000-pound bombs that have been used in the past. And for the first time, the president there confirming to kill civilians in Gaza. So we now know the president was specifying that those kinds of weapons, he says, he will not supply to Israel if they go forward with a full-scale ground invasion of Rafah. What we've seen so far in the last couple of days is what they're calling more limited precision strikes. But if that expands, that is where the president is drawing a very clear line. And he's saying, in addition to those bombs, it would be things like artillery shells that the U.S. would not provide. At the same time, the administration is saying that the U.S. would continue to provide things like helping with air defense systems in Israel, with the Iron Dome, and things that were already approved in that supplemental national security package that passed in Congress recently.
You know, the White House essentially is saying, you know, friends can disagree, but how big of a change is this in for Biden's policy in Gaza and toward Israel? And how is this affecting the relationship between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Well, this is certainly the most strained that it has been so far in this war that has lasted more than 7.5 months. And the president has been clear in almost all of his remarks. He says that the U.S. will still stand by Israel's right to defend itself, that its support for its security is ironclad. But this really shows the gulf between the president's position and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And we know that they have known each other for decades. At times, they have had very contentious conversations. And this is really just the latest example of the U.S. saying something and Israel potentially defying it once again and not heeding the advice or the course that the U.S. would like to set out here. And remember, this is all happening in the context of these very fragile hostage negotiations and talks at the U.S. That's the top priority for them right now, and they want to ensure that. And then so there's a larger concern about what this relationship at this point, what that could mean for this other step that's really crucial as well.
So, Monica, there's of course been so much talk about these ongoing negotiations that are so tenuous, and officials tell NBC News that Netanyahu's government refuses to agree to a deal unless it can move forward with military operations in Gaza, even if that is during a ceasefire. How is that being received by the administration?
And it really seems like there are things here still in terms of what they need to work out between Hamas and Israel that neither side would likely agree to. And so that is how they both need to come to the table, they hope, in the next couple of days. And we know that the CIA director, Bill Burns, has been in the region. He was in Cairo, then he went to Israel to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And now we understand he's going to be back in Cairo to continue some of those talks. But the administration is saying, in effect, they never wanted Israel to go into Rafah because there are so many people who were told to shelter there, more than 1.5 million civilians who simply say, we don't know where else to go. So that has been a pretty firm line from the administration, and now we just have to see whether Israel does continue or whether a deal can come before then.
All right, Monica Alba, thanks very much for your reporting.
All right, amid that growing tension between the U.S. and Israel, President Biden is pushing for Israel and Hamas to reach a ceasefire deal that would head off a large-scale assault on Rafah, where, as we told you, more than 1 million people are sheltering. For more, we are joined by NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez in Tel Aviv. Raf, good morning. What has the reaction been in Israel to President Biden's announcement that the U.S. will not transfer certain offensive weapons if Israel invades Rafah?
Christine, Savannah, good morning. We are seeing a very public eruption of fury from the far right of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government. And it's notable, guys, they are making these statements in English because they want the world to see how angry they are. I'll give you just an example. Itamar Ben-Gvir, he is probably the most extreme member of Netanyahu's government, a man who has previous criminal convictions for being a member of a terror group, for inciting racism. He wrote in English simply, Hamas, heart emoji, Biden. Now, Smotrich, the finance minister, he's a more senior member of the government. He also wrote in English accusing President Biden of imposing an arms embargo on Israel. That is just factually not correct, given that the U.S. continues to supply weapons to Israel, even if it is putting on hold these big 2,000-pound bombs. And it's causing a lot of concern for more moderate Israeli officials. You heard from the president of the state of Israel calling these comments baseless, irresponsible, and insulting, and saying they were potentially harmful to Israeli national security. It is notable we have heard nothing from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself, at least not in public, but an Israeli official told me yesterday that there was deep frustration at the highest levels of the Israeli government about this decision. Guys.
Raf, let's talk about the latest on negotiations this morning. More talks are taking place in Cairo. Where do things stand this morning in ceasefire talks?
So, Savannah, the White House continues to say that they believe the gaps between Israel and Hamas are not unbridgeable, that there is a deal to be reached, but progress in Cairo, if there is any, appears to be very slow and grinding. As Monica was saying, CIA Director Bill Burns was here in Israel yesterday. He met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, briefing the Israeli government on the latest from those talks. He then headed back to Cairo to try to keep shepherding them forward. A number of major sticking points, including whether hostages coming out are all going to be alive or whether this is going to be a mixture of living hostages, dead bodies. And of course, this question about whether this is a temporary pause in the fighting or an end to the war altogether. Guys.
You know, with the Rafah border crossing now occupied by Israeli tanks, right, aid is not getting through. The World Health Organization says Rafah's hospitals are running out of fuel. What's the latest on the ground from that angle?
Yeah, it's a dire, dire situation right now from a humanitarian aid perspective. We've been saying this for months, that the Rafah crossing is the main lifeline for humanitarian aid going into Gaza. It is closed. There are Israeli tanks now on the Palestinian side of that border, and the Israeli government is not giving any timeline as to when it might reopen. And as you mentioned, one of the first things in danger of running out, not so much food and medicine, but fuel, and it's fuel for those trucks which are ferrying what aid is getting through around the Gaza Strip. And what you hear over and over again from the UN, from humanitarian organizations, is that without fuel, there is no humanitarian effort, and what is getting through just piles up on the border. Guys.
Raf Sanchez, thanks so much.
Well, let's head to Capitol Hill, where the Republican-controlled House of Representatives voted overwhelmingly, actually, to save Mike Johnson from an effort to oust him from the speakership. The final tally was, get this, 359 in favor of keeping Johnson as Speaker to just 43 against. The vote was pushed by far-right Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who in the end only got 10 fellow Republicans to vote with her.
Greene had threatened for weeks to force the issue to the House floor after Speaker Johnson helped push the foreign aid package through the House, which will give funds to Ukraine. Here's a little of what Speaker Johnson had to say after that vote.
I appreciate the show of confidence from my colleagues to defeat this misguided effort. That is certainly what it was. As I've said from the beginning, and I've made clear here every day, I intend to do my job. I intend to do what I believe to be the right thing, which is what I was elected to do, and I'll let the chips fall where they may. In my view, that is leadership.
NBC News congressional correspondent Julie Sirkin joins us with the latest. Julie, good morning. So, I mean, this really does just seem like bipartisan support around Speaker Johnson. But walk us through what happened on the House floor before the vote and remind us how we got to this point.
Well, guys, remember, as you pointed out, we've been talking about this effort for weeks and weeks now. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the conservative hardliner from Georgia, who was a supporter of the former House Speaker, she spoke to that when she held a very lengthy press conference with us last week. She said she was going to force this motion to kick Speaker Johnson out of the job, as any one member can do this week. A couple of days ago, we were skeptical that she would actually do this, given the unpopularity of this effort from not only Republicans, but also Democrats, who overwhelmingly voted to save Johnson in the end yesterday. All in all, though, Greene's motion was a surprise not only to us who were watching and following this closely, but also to members of Johnson's leadership team. Take a listen to what Greene had to say on the floor moments before the House was going to recess for the rest of the week.
Mike Johnson is ill-equipped to handle the rigors of the job of Speaker of the House and has allowed a uniparty, one that fuels foreign wars, tramples on civil liberties, and increases our disastrous national debt. When given a choice between advancing Republican priorities or allying with the Democrats to preserve his own personal power, Johnson regularly chooses to ally himself with Democrats.
Now, Greene had given Johnson a list of demands on Monday when they met in his office. Still, that didn't obviously quell her concerns, her motion here to force him to leave the job. This was all a culmination after months of what she said were strikes by Johnson, including the latest, which is putting that $61 billion of aid to Ukraine on the floor.
You know, Julie, House Republicans hold such a very slim majority in the lower chamber. That's why we're here. What's next for GOP leadership? What challenges lie ahead for them with less than 6 months to go now before the election?
Well, that slim majority is exactly even what former President Trump had pointed out when he posted on Truth Social after this motion had failed. He said that now is not the time to force this kind of vote, given their slim majority, the fact that Republicans need to be united, and the next 6 months before the election is exactly what Republican leadership is trying to do. Now, the good thing for Johnson here is that most of the big to-do items are off of his plate, right? That national security supplemental funding the government for this year were kind of those last two 2 items. He does still have to pass some items in the fall, including funding the government for that year, but that is a problem that is months away, guys.
Julie, while we have you, before we let you go, I do want to ask you about Speaker Johnson calling on Congress to pass. It's what's being called an election integrity bill. It's this new move specifically to stop non-citizens from voting. Walk us through what kind of evidence is being provided about the need for this and what we should know about this as it makes its way through.
Well, Johnson held a press conference yesterday with a lot of Trump allies, a lot of conservatives who actually led efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. But Johnson said straight up there really is no evidence that he has to back their claims that undocumented people in America are voting in elections. That has been illegal. Johnson acknowledged that it is illegal, but he said that their bill would actually enable them to study this, to research this more. He said it's something that's hard to prove. But again, all in all, this is just Johnson trying to remain as close an ally as possible to former President Trump as he faces threats to his speakership. It's not clear what future, if any, this bill really has even in the House.
All right, Julie Sirkin, good to see you. Thank you.
All right, to extreme weather now. At least 3 people are dead after another round of deadly storms tore through several states yesterday.
13 tornadoes were reported in 7 states, including hardest hit Tennessee, where destructive storms damaged homes and leveled trees and power lines. People in other states, Alabama, Missouri, Arkansas, they were also forced to take shelter after severe weather ripped across several cities. And this morning, the threat is still, it's not over. Millions of people are still at risk for severe weather from Texas all the way to the mid-Atlantic coast.
All right, NBC News correspondent Priya Sridhar joins us now from hard-hit Columbia, Tennessee. Priya, the town of Columbia took a direct hit from a tornado. What is the extent of the damage that you're seeing there this morning as the sun comes up?
Yeah, that's right. We'll just take a look behind me here if you want just a glimpse of what's happened in Columbia, Tennessee, which is just 45 miles outside of Nashville. This area, as you mentioned, took a direct hit from a powerful twister that touched down here, destroying homes. And today, many Tennesseans are waking up trying to assess the damage because most of this occurred overnight. Let's take a listen to what one woman had to say who lives in this area.
I was just on the porch and I just heard it got real still, and I'd never seen that before. And then I started seeing the clouds, and that's when I heard the roar. That's when I hollered at everybody to get in the closet, and then the next thing we knew, we heard just seen sky. My house is gone. It's just gone. I lost 2 dogs, and we're still looking for my mom and my aunt.
So very scary moments there for people who live in this area. We were driving around this morning and we saw many downed power lines. Lots of people right now still without power. Power crews, we saw them working on the sides of the road trying to restore those power lines. Also downed trees and just lots of damage everywhere. And so we're expecting a press conference shortly where we're going to get a better picture of just how severe the devastation actually is, Savannah.
Absolutely. Just heartbreaking to hear those personal accounts. Priya, tell us about these other places where we saw this severe weather. I mentioned places like Alabama, Missouri, Oklahoma. What are you hearing about the damage in those other states?
Yeah, there's actually been 214 tornado warnings issued across the country in just the last week alone, which just gives you an indication as to how severe this weather system that's been moving across the country is. In Huntsville, Alabama, as you mentioned, there was actually a massive tornado that touched down there that even caused a local TV news station to have to hunker down while they were actually on air. And in Michigan, we remember the tornadoes just hit there very recently in the past 24 hours. Massive cleanups are still underway as neighborhoods were completely wiped out. The governor of Michigan actually declaring a state of emergency in 4 counties, Savannah.
All right, Priya, thank you so much for that. Around all that severe weather, just amazing again and again and again.
Absolutely. And yes, Priya, thank you so much. Well, that's going to continue today, actually, from Texas all the way to New Jersey.
Meteorologist Angie Lassman joins us now with the latest. Good morning, Angie.
Good morning, ladies. Quite the start to our spring severe, season. We've really ramped that up over the past couple of days, going on the 6th consecutive week of it. And we continue to see some strong storms working through parts of the southeast this morning. Notice we have a tornado watch in effect. Parts of Alabama, Mississippi. That's going to be in effect until 10 a.m. Central Time. We've got this stretching, though, into parts of Georgia. That's going to last until early afternoon hours. So we're still going to be watching for some strong storms through this same region through the day today. Notice all of the lightning, the heavy rain that's associated with that. Because of the heavy rain, the flood watches and warnings are up already in some of these spots. We've got Nashville right now under a flash flood warning extending out towards Chattanooga, Knoxville, Johnson City, Hazard, all included in those flash flood watches that'll last through the day today as we gear up for more kinds of rounds of this repeated, really strong storms possible. Notice what's going to happen through the day today and into this evening. We've got some rain that's going to work into parts of the Great Lakes and parts of the Mid-Atlantic. That's not so much what we're worried about. It's more the strong storms that develop from Texas to southern New Jersey, rather. You can see how expansive this is. More than 60 million people included in the severe risk area today. It looks like our tornado threat has gone down. So that's a positive, right? But it's not zero. So we still have the chance to see some isolated tornadoes across this region. But we're more specifically looking for those really strong wind gusts, 75 miles per hour or higher. We've got Waco, Alexandria, Jackson, Shreveport, Montgomery, all included in that. Does stretch into parts of Georgia. So we're concerned about the straight line wind damage. Again, more than 60 miles per hour, more than 75 miles per hour, all possible across this region. Tomorrow, the severe threat is going to go down a little more, but we're still going to see some of that heavy rain across parts of the Northeast, and we'll still see some thunderstorms across the Southeast. That's where we're going to watch for the severe threat. It'll be kind of similar to today, but a whole lot less people involved. But still, if you live in Jacksonville, Valdosta, Savannah, you're going to want to have a way to get those alerts because some, again, damaging winds will be possible in a couple of tornadoes also along with the hail. That's all as we get into tomorrow. The good news, if you're looking for it for the middle of the country, which we know has just dealt with day after day after day over the past few weeks of some really strong storms and the severe weather, we're going to be storm-free by tomorrow across the middle of the country. Those spring storms are going to be focused across the east. As I mentioned, the strongest of those for the southeast, but we'll see plenty of sunshine for a lot of folks, the Great Lakes, the south, even out west, we'll be dealing with some record warmth. As we look ahead to the weekend, the showers will return to parts of the middle of the country, but still, it's not going to be like what we've seen so far this week. We'll see some showers centered from the Great Lakes to across towards the northeast, maybe interior New England areas. Looking for sunshine on Saturday, it's across the west. That is where we'll see some really nice conditions. And we know Mother's Day, we've got to celebrate our moms on Sunday. Great conditions, sparkling conditions out west. And
is that for me?
Yes, that's for you.
I like when she puts cute words on the graphics.
Yes, always. They're all for Savannah. We will deal with some rain, though, guys, for the middle of the country. So indoor plans for mom, places like Texas where we could see some flooding.
All right, nice. Sparkling west. I can't think of a better word, actually. Angie, thank you so much.
Nice to see you, Angie. Much more to come here on Morning News Now later this hour. Tech trouble for Neuralink's first inhuman brain implant. What Elon Musk's startup is saying about a malfunction in the system.
At first, after the break, though, a renewed call for change in Texas over accusations of racist and homophobic bullying in a school district. We'll be right back.
We are back with a major new development on a story NBC News has been covering for years. Schools in Southlake, Texas have faced accusations of racist and homophobic bullying. Now, the U.S. Department of Education is calling on the district to address claims of civil rights violations. NBC News correspondent Antonio Hilton reports.
For over 3 years, NBC News has investigated the picturesque Southlake, Texas Carroll Independent School District, where some students told us about a culture of racist and homophobic bullying.
What happens to black kids when they go through school systems where they don't feel entirely at home?
I think that it strips them of their identity, and I think that they leave a shell of the person that they once were.
Documents reviewed by NBC News show that this week, the Department of Education notified Southlake's Carroll schools that it intends to negotiate with the district over 4 students' civil rights complaints. We spoke with a lawyer for the students.
When the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights notifies a district that they're being invited to negotiate resolution of a complaint, it means that they have made a formal finding that the school district violated those complainants' civil rights.
Christian was 12 years old and had just left the district when we met him in 2022.
What were kids saying?
They were using gay slurs and being very rude to me.
Southlake was thrust into the national spotlight in 2018 when a video of students chanting the N-word went viral. A group of conservative residents then defeated a proposed diversity and inclusion plan.
By the time my youngest was in 9th grade. He was getting called the N-word pretty regularly.
Mom Angela Jones filed one of the federal complaints.
I knew that my children's civil rights had been violated, but to have the Department of Education come out and say they agree, that meant the world to me.
Southlake's Carroll School District did not respond to requests for comment, but in August of 2021, we sat down with Superintendent Lane Ledbetter.
Is there racism in Southlake and in Carroll ISD?
So let me think about that question. I'm going to stop there. I think it goes back to people understanding each other, almost from an empathy standpoint, just being able to understand varying perspectives and differences.
Angela Jones's children have already left the school, but she believes she has an obligation to the students still there.
I can't sit here and let those children face the exact same thing my children faced. That's not being a good citizen.
Our thanks to Antonia Hilton for that report. According to the Department of Education, the district will have to negotiate an agreement to, quote, remedy both the individual discrimination at issue as well as any systemic discrimination. If they do not cooperate, legal experts say they could lose federal funding or face judicial proceedings.
Well, in the race for the White House, President Biden made a stop in the key battleground state of Wisconsin on Wednesday. Looking to drum up support, the president specifically touted his economic achievements while in the White House. As NBC News chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander explains, Mr. Biden is facing some skepticism from voters.
President Biden in Wisconsin, his fourth visit to the crucial battleground this year, announcing the creation of a multi-billion-dollar AI data center. Microsoft promising to bring thousands of jobs.
We're seeing a great American comeback story all across Wisconsin, and quite frankly, the entire country.
The president also trying to cast a contrast here at the same site where then President Trump announced a $10 billion electronics factory. But that massive project never materialized.
Look what happened. They dug a hole with those golden shovels, and then they fell into it.
Union worker Eric Stolz voted for Mr. Trump in 2020, but is backing the president now.
What does new manufacturing mean in a city like this?
Everything to me, my family, to my community, to the whole state of Wisconsin. Go outside, look at the cranes. Go outside, look at the roads.
Still, President Biden has a lot of convincing to do. A poll this week shows Americans trust Mr. Trump over the president on the economy and inflation by double digits, while 2/3 of Americans say they're living paycheck to paycheck. Mr. Trump slamming President Biden just last week.
It's called a new tax. It's called inflation tax. We call it the Biden inflation tax.
At the Sugar Shack in downtown Racine, Michelle Noonan's family business is thriving, but rising prices are taking a toll.
It's just a lot more challenges for any business owner these days.
Yes, everything costs more.
The Noonans now always looking to spend less.
I feel like it was better, easier for me 4 years ago. I could just go to work, right, come home, not really have to worry about so much.
Here in Wisconsin, President Biden also warned in the starkest terms yet that he believes if Mr. Trump loses, he will not accept the election results this fall. Back to you.
All right, Peter, thank you very much. Well, coming up, Gen Z deep in debt, a startling new study showing the impacts of inflation on younger Americans. When we come back, one of our favorite financial gurus, Caleb Silver, is here. He's going to help break down the data. Give us a wave. He's going to share some tips on how to get out and stay out of debt.
Big brain over there. Plus, big beef and big business. How the diss track duel between Drake and Kendrick Lamar is impacting streams and sales. This is Morning News Now. A troubling new study this morning found that Generation Z is racking up debt at a faster rate than millennials did at their age.
Yeah, according to a new report from the Credit Bureau TransUnion, Americans in their 20s are carrying more debt and reporting higher delinquency rates than the previous generation, as Christine just said, at the same age.
Because interest rates are so high, that's not a good thing. Joining us now to help put this in perspective is editor-in-chief at Investopedia, Caleb Silver. Good morning. So according to that report last year, the average credit card balance for 22 to 24-year-olds was, 26% higher than the average balance of this Gen Z, the millennials back in 2013. What does this mean?
Yeah, it means that that notion of the American dream that a lot of us grew up with, if we worked hard, if we went to college, if we did the right thing, we'd be able to live a reasonable life. It gets further and further away. So you have a lot of things that have come together in the last decade, 2 decades. Loosened credit card restrictions after the pandemic, inflation averaging around 2.7% a year. You know, wages haven't kept up with that until recently. And you get this revenge spending also coming out of the pandemic, the YOLO effect, where I'm just going to do it. I don't know what's going to happen next, so I'm going to spend today and enjoy my life. That plus just higher interest rates. That's what's behind this.
How big of a deal? This was really a question for both of you. You're also an expert in this arena. How big of a deal is it that this many people are in this much debt? Who should this be really concerning?
Well, it's concerning for everybody because these are future spenders. These are the people that go on to build families, spend a lot of money building homes. This is what makes the economy churn, right? So there's also the phantom debt that we're not even talking about here with buy now, pay later services. That's not included here. That can't even be counted right now by these credit agencies. So you have these people who are just continuing to spend, who have this notion that they're never going to be able to make enough to save and invest for the future.
I mean, they can't get a foot in the housing market right now, right? So they're using credit and they're using debt and they're consuming.
And
I mean, these are consumers. They're not like sort of investing in some of these big purchases. So I wonder how does it hold them back in their adult life if they are so indebted and so young?
Yeah, it puts that home ownership further and further away. The debt to income ratio, that's what we look at when we look at how much debt people have. That has grown by about 4 percentage points in just the last few years because higher inflation, higher interest rates, higher everything, especially housing costs. So all the things that you thought you could afford on that salary, you really can't anymore. That median salary for college grads, around $60,000 pre-taxes. When you think about rent, that's like $2,200 a month on average. That's already more than a third of what you're bringing home.
I would have loved $60,000 when I graduated from college. That was not in the cards. Not in the cards at all.
Tell us, remind us, give us tips. How can Gen Z try to eliminate their debt, and what pitfalls can they be thinking about? Maybe those things like buy now, pay later, all that kind of stuff they should keep in mind.
Yeah, so it's all about knowing what it costs to be you, and a lot of people never really establish that. You have to know what it costs to be you and then work backwards from that. That high interest debt, you got to avoid it. That could come in the form of a credit card payment.
So dangerous.
That could be a car payment. That could be missed payments on interest-bearing loans, so you have to watch out for that. And don't spread yourself out across a bunch of products. One credit card, know how much you spend, keep it under control, pay yourself, and make its rule where it's like, I am not going to spend on that until I pay down this debt. 2x versus 1x. You have to have rules when it comes to managing your own money.
You know what surprises me? The number of people who tell me, especially young people who say they think it's smart to carry over a little bit of credit card debt every month because it's good for your credit score. That's totally not true. And you don't also want to spend your credit card to the limit and then pay it all off, because that looks like you're in distress as well. You want to use about 30% of what your maximum is and then pay it off every month, and you'll have a high credit score, and then you can use debt and credit, pay it off every month, and it's very good.
That's right. Good credit, good debt, and your credit utilization rate has to be in that sweet spot so that you can get loans to buy the house, to buy the car, build good credit, and use it that way.
And use credit to advance your life, not to hold you back. Caleb, great to see you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, let's get to some financial headlines, starting with a hiccup at Elon Musk's startup Neuralink.
Yeah, CNBC's Silvana Henao joins us with that and more. Hey, Silvana, good morning.
Hey, Savannah. Hey, Christine. Good morning to you. Yeah, so Neuralink, that's Elon Musk's neurotechnology startup, has run into a problem with the implant in its first human patient. In March, Neuralink placed its interface into the brain of Nolan Arbaugh, who is paralyzed from the shoulders down. Now, it uses threads and electrodes to let users control a computer cursor with their minds. In a blog post, Neuralink says some data has been lost because some of those threads have retracted from his brain, but it believes it can fix the issue. Neuralink plans to install the implant in 10 more patients this year. Roughly 1 in 37 homes are now considered seriously underwater. New data from real estate firm Adam finds 2.7% of homes nationwide carry a loan balance of at least 25% more than their market value. That's still much lower than before the pandemic, when the rate was more than twice as high. Now, mortgages can become seriously underwater when a buyer overpays for a home, or it's bought with a small down payment that doesn't provide a big enough buffer if property values fall. And the big beef between Drake and Kendrick Lamar is turning into big business for their music. Billboard says Lamar's first diss track, Euphoria, debuted at number 11 on the Hot 100 chart with more than 27 million audio streams. Listeners are also checking out the classic songs sampled in the diss tracks. Tracks by Al Green and Teddy Pendergrass are seeing huge spikes in streams. So there you have it.
All right, Savannah, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Nice
Savannah.
to see you. All right, coming up, a major move in the fight against global warming. When we come back, we'll take you to Iceland, where new groundbreaking technology called Mammoth could hold the key to fighting climate change.
Plus, also after the break, he inherited a legacy. Now Luke Russert is sharing his story from losing his father, NBC News legend Tim Russert, to his own journey of self-discovery. He'll join us next on his brand new book. This is Morning News Now. Welcome back. Nearly 16 years ago, NBC News legend Tim Russert died suddenly while preparing for Meet the Press in our NBC News Washington newsroom. Russert was the longest-serving moderator of the program. Of course, interviewed some of the greats and left behind a mighty, mighty legacy.
A legacy his son, Luke Russert, inherited. Luke was just 22 years old when his father died, and he joined NBC News as a correspondent. He was with the network for 8 years until he abruptly left to embark on a journey of self-discovery. That journey took Luke to more than 60 countries in 3 years, and on the way, he confronted his grief over his devastating loss.
Yeah, and Luke Russert, New York Times bestselling author of Look for Me There, Grieving My Father and Finding Myself, joins us now. Luke, good morning.
Guys.
Great
so
to
much for
see
having
you
me.
and have you here with us in NBC.
Our good friend Sean in the control room. What a guy.
Hi, Sean. There's
Great
a shout out. Okay, so walk viewers through kind of just this like parallel journey that you were on between grief and then also literally this journey of traveling and deciding kind of to share about it and how those two things merged along the way.
It's a great question because I was doing two things. I was trying to figure out who I was independent of the Washington bubble, independent of my last name, independent of this crazy world I grew up in when I was almost on a first-name basis with the President of the United States and working in politics in very much the same space that my father was in. That kind of came to me at 30 years old. Who am I independent of this? So I wanted to search for that. I knew it wasn't going to happen in Washington, D.C., and I knew it wasn't going to happen in the U.S. I had to get out to places where nobody knew me, nobody cared about me, and no one really cared about American politics. So I really wanted to do that on the road. But the other thing that I was doing was a parallel escape, and that was from really processing grief. Because I had never really sat in that grief, because in my own head, if I ever really did, then I would have to admit that my father was gone. And I just didn't want to do that. So I did a lot of young men do, store and ignore, don't think about it, focus in on work, focus in on other things. But ultimately, grief will catch up to you. So you have to deal with it at some point. A lot of people do it in different ways. I think it's a journey that's different for so many different folks. But for me, it took the time away to really get into a space of being vulnerable, that I was able to process that grief and become a better version of myself.
Grief is such a universal experience. You know, it happens to everyone at some point.
Right.
And your story of self-discovery, I think, is also so universal. What have readers been saying? What are the most interesting things
It's so
readers have
interesting.
said?
When I wrote this book, I thought it would be really for my own cohort, the sort of millennial cohort, people who have lost a parent on the younger side, who really didn't have enough time with their parents. And what I was struck by was all these readers reached out to me, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. I got letters from people in their 90s that said, I read your book and it helped me to process a loss that I've been dealing with for 70 years. And I think it speaks to the volume of how it's still a taboo subject in society. People don't really open up about it, especially those older generations. I'm so happy that the conversations now are becoming more public. People are becoming more vulnerable, because that gets them to a place where they don't feel alone, that we are all going through this in a grief sense. But I was really struck by that. I did not think it would register with older people as much as it did. And I'm so thankful for it, because they're very loyal readers and they formed a real community around me and with each other. And it's been great to see.
This is going to be like sort of meta, but this is something that our friend Vicky Wynn, another one of our anchors here, of course, and I talk about a lot, is like, feels like we're on this path, right, in life, but there's some alternate universe where you could have taken this one, or what if I would have made a different decision? It kind of feels like you got to explore that. Like, you had your father's legacy, you had everything going in D.C., and you thought, I'm going to go try this other thing and see what I find and see how I feel. What was it like to kind of seize that opportunity?
It's scary at first, because you feel weird. You have this incredible gilded path in front of you, especially me, a very privileged one, and it's all there for the taking, but something felt off. Why are you not taking it? Why do you go to work, go to the Capitol, you have a great day, you're on Nightly, you're on Today's Show, you're interviewing the Speaker of the House, and something's off? And when I started to explore that, I realized it was an identity thing, but also I was like, hey, there's a world outside of media. There's a world outside of these crazy, grueling schedules we put ourselves through. I know it looks very glamorous to the outside world, but as you know, it is not. Yeah. You get up very early. It's not complaining, but it's not reality half the time. Yeah. So for me, I had this desire to see that, and I found myself when I was on assignment going around the country. You know, I would say, hey, where's the dive bar in this local area where I'm covering a politician? I want to go hear those stories. I want to go talk to those people. And then I started doing that around the world, and it made me feel more whole. And what I walked away from is that we as human beings, we want a roof over our heads, we want food in our belly, and we want our children to have opportunity and a sense of safety. And that's just sort of the universal truth. But it was fun to discover it. It made me a better person.
Wow. God, I feel like I need to call you and be like, should I go travel?
You should. Luke. You can really put yourself up against the world. Yeah. And there's a real value in that, to go to places we don't know the language and you don't know the customs.
That's brave. It's brave.
Yeah, it's very brave. And it's a gift to us all that you did it and you shared it.
Thank you so much.
Luke Russert, thank you so much. Great to have you here. Thank you so much. Look for me there. It's out now. The paperback out now. Go check it out.
With a new afterword.
Yeah, exactly. Coming up, an underwater mystery unlocked.
Up next, we'll dive into scientists' new findings into one species of whale's secret language. This is Morning News Now.
Welcome back. We're going to dive into the animal kingdom. Sperm whales are some of the largest creatures on planet Earth. They're also some of the most talkative, communicating with each other in their own language. NBC News Chief Environmental Affairs correspondent Ann Thompson has more on these chatty giants.
To you and me, the underwater noises sperm whales make sound like tapping. But these vocalizations, scientists say, are actually language. And more sophisticated than imagined in Finding Nemo.
Dory, this is not whale.
These series of clicks are called codas, that scientists say are the building blocks of communication between these mammoth sea creatures. Far from arbitrary, a new study published in Nature found whales use 4 basic elements, including rhythm and tempo, to create a phonetic alphabet.
How does this phonetic alphabet work?
It essentially looks at the speed at which they're saying things, at the kind of different texture, emphasis on how I said something.
Researchers from Dr. David Gruber's Cetacean Translation Initiative listened to some 8,700 of these snippets made by whales off the Caribbean island of Dominica. Trying to figure out what they are saying is the next step.
Do you think it's possible that one day we could talk to whales?
I think it will be possible to be able to be sending information back and forth. We're not really sure what it's going to look like. That's the kind of cool thing.
And become real-life Dr. Doolittles, learning the ABCs of the deep. Ann Thompson, NBC News.
Okay, that is just too cool to learn
Really
about.
cool.
I love
Really
it.
cool.
All right, well, in the fight against global warming, the world's largest direct air capture plant is now officially up and running. We're going to tell you what that means. It's just outside Iceland's capital.
It's called Mammoth. It was created by the Swiss company ClimateWorks to remove carbon from the atmosphere.
Yeah, CNBC senior climate correspondent Diana Oleg joins us from Iceland with an exclusive look at this plant. Diana, good morning. So walk us through how this technology works and how much of a difference it can make.
Yeah, good morning. So this direct air capture plant is actually sucking carbon out of the atmosphere at a record pace. So-called Mammoth is the newest and largest DAC plant in the world. It's from Zurich-based Climeworks, about 10 times the size of its previous model. The first section is now operational, and it will be totally done by the end of this year, eventually removing roughly 30,000 tons of carbon per year. That's the annual emissions of about 7,000 gasoline-powered cars. So the way it works is that huge fans pull air into the containers where steam is used to separate out the carbon dioxide. Then that CO2 is pumped into water, kind of like a giant soda stream, and piped into the ground where it eventually becomes rock. And this is just the beginning, but actually it's all expected in the end eventually to be about $1 trillion industry. Guys, back to you.
The administration is investing billions to build up carbon capture industry in the U.S. How soon could we see plants like that maybe in the U.S. and where would they be?
Well, so Climeworks just entered the U.S. market. They've got something about to start in Louisiana. It's thanks to $500 million from the Department of Energy. It's one of 78 companies in the U.S. direct air capture space, and these are from small startups to names like ExxonMobil. And there are a lot of companies in there that are purchasing the carbon removal, and that's for about $1,000 per ton, but they're hoping eventually to get that down to about $300 per ton. These are big names buying the carbon removal, names like Microsoft, Shopify, JP Morgan Chase. Wow. So a lot of big U.S. corporations looking to do this.
So Diana, tell us what's actually powering this.
Okay, so this is so interesting. If you can see back over there, there's this big white puff of smoke. It's not actually smoke, it's steam. And what that is geothermal energy. And there are these enormous, enormous pipes. They're going from over there, piping into the Climeworks plant here and powering this. And the reason geothermal energy works so well here in Iceland is because basically we're standing on a volcano. So you can imagine how hot it is downstairs.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Diana, have you ever seen anything like this just in covering so much climate news? I mean, how exciting is this?
I mean, this is really huge. We have seen direct air capture plants before, and Climeworks was one of the first to do this in Switzerland. But again, this is 10 times the size. And they said that they expect this will actually have an upgrade. Once they get facilities like this to the U.S., they'll be able to go even bigger and better. In fact, the CEO told me that while this plant is expected to last 25 years, he doesn't want it to last 25 years because the technology is improving so much that they will have even bigger and better sooner than that.
Diana, you look so tiny next to it. It is huge. It helps us understand. Thank you very much. Very cool stuff.
All right, that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But don't go anywhere because the news continues right now. Good morning. Thanks for joining us this Thursday. I'm Savannah Sellers.
And I'm Christine Romans in for Joe Fryer. Right now on Morning News Now, former President Trump back in court this morning in that hush money probe involving adult film star Stormy Daniels. What we're expecting to hear when Daniels returns to the witness stand to be cross-examined by Mr. Trump's lawyers. States of emergency, devastating severe storms walloping the South and Midwest this morning. At least 3 people are dead, and millions more from Texas to New Jersey are at risk of even more wild weather. And we're getting a jaw-dropping closer look at the widespread damage caused by a violent tornado that ripped through one city just outside of Nashville. Our Angie Lassman is tracking it all. Plus, President Biden's sharp threat to Israel over supplying weapons as it ramps up that offensive in Rafah. We've got the latest as those violent college campus protests we've seen in the U.S. now make their way to the campaign trail. And the Taylor Swift show rolls into Paris as the Eras tour reaches the City of Lights. Big numbers of American Swifties are flying out for the shows as fans speculate on whether the singer will be sneaking some new songs from the Tortured Poets Department onto the set list.
Oh, we're pretty sure, because she loves to give us clues, which we have found.
We begin this hour, though, with the legal woes of the former President Donald Trump, who is back in New York City today in a courtroom for his hush money trial.
Yeah, Mr. Trump will be watching the testimony of adult film actress Stormy Daniels, as he has been for the last few days. She's returning to the stand for cross-examination. On Tuesday, Daniels recounted her alleged sexual encounter with Mr. Trump, which the former president denies in graphic detail. All this comes after a Georgia court agreed to hear an appeal application from Mr. Trump challenging a judge's decision, you'll remember this, not to disqualify Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis from that state's election interference case.
NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard joins us now from outside the courthouse in New York. Good morning again, Vaughn. Let's start with the hush money trial. Stormy Daniels back on the stand today. What is the defense expected to focus on for this cross-examination?
Yeah, good morning, guys. They had their initial opportunity for about 2 hours to ask Stormy Daniels a couple questions under cross-examination. We expect that to continue here this morning when court convenes in about 90 minutes. This here for the defense attorneys for Donald Trump is a key opportunity to try to extract some discrepancies out of her stories. We're talking about events, including the sexual encounter she alleges with Donald Trump dating back to 2006. So you got a big window, and that is where you saw from from their initial questioning, trying to call into question the credibility of Stormy Daniels' stories, even calling into question whether she actually told the truth about an alleged parking lot incident in 2011 in which she said she and her daughter were threatened by an unknown man not to talk about her experiences with Donald Trump. But the defense attorneys for Donald Trump also tried to paint a picture of somebody that had a vendetta against him in front of this jury, explicitly asking her if she hates President Trump, to which she responded, yes. They followed up, and you want him to go to jail. Stormy Daniels responding, I want him to be held accountable. This here is going to be another big day after the cross-examination from Donald Trump's defense attorneys. The prosecution will then be able to have redirect, ask her another set of questions after that. So we should expect quite a tense day here in Lower Manhattan, guys.
Yeah, Vaughn, we should expect still a couple more weeks of this, right? What should we expect after Stormy Daniels testifies? Who else might take the witness stand? And could we eventually see Mr. Trump himself do so?
Right. The prosecution indicated at the end of last week that they had about 2 more weeks of witness questioning. And at that point, once we get those witnesses, including likely Michael Cohen, who could very well take several days himself as the marquee witness, the defense for Donald Trump will then have the opportunity to call their own witnesses. That could take anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks. So we are looking at potentially the beginning of June, potentially even by Memorial Day, but more likely into June, this trial going. So we are in the heart of this here trial, and this jury, which we should notice, 12 individuals, 6 alternates. Nobody has left the jury box here at this point in time. So this trial is moving on schedule here, but we've still got several weeks to go.
Vaughn, let's move now to the former president's legal troubles in Georgia, the Georgia election interference case, and the reopening of this question of whether to disqualify the Fulton County DA, Fani Willis. Walk us through the appeal and what are the possible implications for this case?
Right. When we're talking about trials that are moving on schedule, the Fulton County one is not. And that's largely because of this issue that Donald Trump's attorneys have brought forward in motions in their efforts to disqualify Fani Willis, the district attorney who brought these charges against him and those 18 other defendants. They've sought to have her removed from prosecuting this case because she hired Nathan Wade as special prosecutor, somebody who she had engaged in a romantic relationship with. And they already had a hearing before Judge McAfee, who is the one who is going to be hearing this case. But now, yesterday, an appeals court in Georgia said that if Donald Trump chooses to file a notice of appeal within the next 10 days, they would hear an appeal because the judge overseeing this case ruled that Fani Willis could stay on this case, that while there was potentially a conflict of interest, that it would not take her away or make her disqualified from being able to fairly prosecute this case. Donald Trump's team is now going to be able to have the chance to have that appeal heard. So we're looking at a likelihood that that Fulton County election interference case will not be heard before November's 2024 presidential election, guys.
All right, Vaughn, thank you so much.
Yes, thanks, Vaughn. Well, now let's get to more extreme weather that's hitting the middle of the country, including destructive tornadoes in Tennessee. In the hard-hit town of Columbia, people are just beginning to wake up, start to pick up the pieces after a tornado ripped through the area. That is where NBC News correspondent Priya Sridhar is this morning. Priya, good morning.
Good morning. This area just 45 miles outside of Nashville took a direct hit when a powerful twister touched down here, destroying homes like the one behind me. And now officials are saying that there are at least 3 storm-related fatalities and several more injuries.
Overnight in the Midwest and South, another round of destructive weather. In Columbia, Tennessee, tornadoes reducing homes to rubble.
This is a catastrophic tornado. It is one of the more severe storms we've probably seen in the last 5 to 10 years.
A huge swath of forest leveled, with trees snapped like matchsticks. Lives uprooted in Maury County, Tennessee.
I started seeing the clouds, and that's when I heard the roar, and that's when I hollered at everybody to get in the closet, and then the next thing we knew, we heard just seen sky. My house is gone. This is just gone. I lost 2 dogs, and we're still looking for my mom and my aunt.
More than 80 twisters across 17 states over the last 3 days. The storms bringing chaos across the South, intense rain and flooding. Entire cities without power, cars crushed by reported tornadoes. Large hail, heavy rains, and high winds turning deadly in Lone Mountain, Tennessee, where a tree fell on a car, killing a 22-year-old man. In Portage, Michigan, a massive cleanup effort now underway in neighborhoods shredded by a massive tornado. This house flipped completely upside down with a couple in their 60s inside. The state's governor declaring a state of emergency in 4 counties.
The devastation's real. There are a lot of displaced families.
And in just the last week across the country, there have been 214 tornado warnings issued, which have many forecasters saying that the nation's so-called tornado alley is actually widening its footprint to more populated areas in places like here in Tennessee, Mississippi, and the Ohio River Valley. Savannah?
All right, Priya, thank you very much.
Okay, so let's bring in NBC meteorologist Angie Lassman this morning.
She's tracking another potential round of severe weather this morning. We have been talking about this every day this week. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, guys. We sure have. And we've got, as you mentioned, another round where we could see some of these really strong storms developing now over parts of the southeast, stretching up into the mid-Atlantic. This morning, though, already quite active. Notice we've got tornado watches in effect from Mississippi to Atlanta, or to Georgia, rather, including Atlanta, Birmingham, and Tupelo. This big batch of thunderstorms has been slowly but surely working its way east across this region this morning, dumping heavy rain along with all of the lightning and the rumbles of thunder that I'm sure a lot of folks woke up to this morning. We still have some of these flood watches and warnings in effect at this time. You can see where some of these flash flood warnings still are. Nashville included in that, Chattanooga, as well as that rain continues to move to the east. Here's the deal for later today. A bit of rain across the mid-Atlantic. That's not so much what we're so worried about. It's the thunderstorms that start to ramp up from Texas to New Jersey here as the afternoon gets going. This is the area that we're watching. Washington, D.C., Wilmington, Savannah, Montgomery, and stretching out to Dallas, all included in this here as we get into the afternoon hours. Our biggest concern is going to be the strong wind gusts, but we also have on the table the potential for some hail and some tornadoes. Now, the tornado threat lower than it has been in past days. It's not zero, so we're still going to watch for the chance for some isolated tornadoes to develop, but our biggest concern, as I mentioned, is the winds. We're talking 75 miles per hour or higher. 80-mile-per-hour winds are very possible. Dallas, Shreveport, Alexandria, and stretching into Georgia. This is something that we'll see into the afternoon hours, and even a big swath of this part of the country could see those wind gusts at least over 60 miles per hour. So some impressive winds associated with this is what we're expecting. By tomorrow, the risk for severe storms is much lower and it's much smaller. I'll show you that here in a moment, but notice it will be a little soggy across parts of the Northeast with some steady rain working in as we see that system work to the east. Here's what we're watching for tomorrow. From Daytona Beach to Wilmington and out towards Montgomery, we've got the chance for some general thunderstorms with the greatest chance of some of these stronger storms focused across Savannah, Valdosta, and Jacksonville. Those are the spots that we'll watch for our main threat of damaging winds, maybe a couple of tornadoes, and some hail also on the table. This is going to be finally long gone here as we get into Saturday, but we'll start to kind of see the rain working into the middle of the country by the time the weekend ends. Here's a look at your Friday, though. Storm-free for the middle of the country. I know welcome relief for folks that are cleaning up after quite a week of some really strong storms there. We'll see record warmth out west. We'll end up with temperatures upper 70s, 80s, even 90s across the desert southwest, so watch for the warmth there. The showers return for folks across the middle of the country, just showers. We're not looking at really strong storms like what we saw this past week, and we'll see some bright skies still for folks across the west coast. We'll end up with the Great Lakes dealing with a little sunshine and maybe even some cooler showers that start to settle in for the interior northeast. Down through the southeast, though, temperatures well into the 80s. And Mother's Day, yep, rain or shine, we're celebrating our moms. We've got 70s on tap across the south. I mentioned those temperatures in the 90s. Places like Phoenix will hit 97 degrees on Sunday. So here's the deal. If you need some ideas, because, you know, we've got rain in the forecast. New York, Boston, Kansas City, guys. Treatment. Breakfast in bed, movie marathon. But how about the good places for weather? Outdoor brunch, maybe a picnic, guys, across the bookends of the country.
Regina, our mom in the rainy area, says yes to the home spa treatment.
Okay, Regina's husband's watching. Get to planning.
It was so nice to see you, Andrew. Thank you so much.
All right, let's turn to the White House now, where President Biden is taking his strongest stance yet against Israel's potential ground offensive in Rafah. He has paused the shipment of American bombs in the hopes that Prime Minister Netanyahu will pull back from that area in southern Gaza. It comes as the president continues to hit the campaign trail, though, with his focus on the battleground state of Wisconsin currently. NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez joins us with the latest details. Gabe, good morning.
Hey there, Savannah. Good morning. For weeks, the White House has said that it opposes a large-scale assault on Rafah, but President Biden is now taking a much harder line, threatening to withhold more weapons from Israel, a key U.S. ally. Overnight, President Biden's most forceful comments yet as Israel ramps up its offensive against Hamas in Rafah.
If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem.
The president has already paused a shipment of 3,500 additional U.S. bombs to Israel. President Biden also acknowledging for the first time that American bombs have been used against Palestinian civilians, telling CNN,
civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs.
An Israeli official tells NBC News there is deep frustration over the U.S. decision to delay the bomb shipment. Republican critics also pushing back.
I think Biden's treading on some thin ice there, and he's making a big mistake.
This as ceasefire talks between the Israelis and Hamas reach a critical stage. The State Department says an agreement that could stop the fighting and secure the release of the hostages is within reach. With protest over the war looming over his re-election bid, the president traveling to battleground Wisconsin, noting his opponent, Mr. Trump, visited the same site 6 years ago to announce a $10 billion electronics factory, a project that never got off the ground.
They dug a hole with those golden shovels, and then they fell into it.
Recent polls show Americans trust Mr. Trump over President Biden on the economy. The president acknowledging overnight that Americans are struggling with inflation, but
if you take a look at what the people have, they have the money to spend.
And asked about Mr. Trump's recent comments to a Milwaukee newspaper suggesting he won't accept the results of the 2024 election if he loses, the president was blunt.
It's saying whether he may not accept the outcome of the election. I promise you he won't.
Also looming over the administration, a high-stakes report by the State Department on whether Israel has violated international law in Gaza. That's been delayed. It was initially expected Wednesday, but now we're told it could be finished in the next few days. Savannah.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez, thank you so much. All right, now to the latest on the ongoing unrest at college campuses nationwide. Anti-war demonstrations have already forced some schools to modify graduation ceremonies. And overnight at USC, hundreds gathered for a pro-Israel rally just outside the campus. Liz Kreutz was there, joins us now with more. Liz, good morning to you.
Hey, Christine, good morning to you. Yeah, students may be celebrating here, but it's still very tense at USC as pro-Israel supporters marched around the campus last night. The Academic Senate voted to censure USC's president over her handling of pro-Palestinian demonstrations and her canceling of the commencement. It's just another example of the tensions and divisions at so many universities nationwide right now.
As graduates snap photos and put on their caps and gowns. At USC, a pro-Israel rally shut down a major street just outside campus.
We're going to stand up to the hate and the anti-Semitism that has, become pervasive on all these college campuses.
This is the reality this graduation season, the juxtaposition of joy from graduates and protests.
This demonstration coming just days after the university shut down a pro-Palestinian encampment. USC, the first school to cancel its main commencement ceremony, citing security concerns, highlighting the tensions on college campuses amid the Israel-Hamas war. Officials at UMass Amherst say more than 100 people were arrested for refusing to leave a makeshift encampment. While students at the Rhode Island School of Design are still occupying a building demanding the school divest financially from Israel. These student-driven demonstrations spreading globally too. From Amsterdam to Madrid and Berlin. Here in the U.S., lawmakers turning their focus to grade schools. As a House committee led by Republicans grilled K-12 administrators on Capitol Hill, accusing some elementary and high schools of letting anti-Semitism run rampant in classrooms.
What are you doing to keep students safe? You've been accused of doing nothing and turning a blind eye.
New York City Schools Chancellor pushing back.
We cannot simply discipline our way out of this problem. The true antidote to ignorance and bias is to teach.
Now, as scaled-back commencement ceremonies are underway at USC, graduates forced to celebrate amid a backdrop of broiling tensions.
It's really sad to see, the people graduating this year to just not be able to experience such an important part of, what commencement is, right?
And Christine, while this vote to censure USC's president is largely symbolic, the motion does come with a demand that the university create a task force to investigate recent actions here. Meanwhile, at nearby UCLA, some faculty and staff say they plan to rally today, calling for the protesters who were arrested last week to have their charges dropped and for UCLA's chancellor to resign. Christine.
All right, Liz, thank you so much for that.
Well, House Speaker Mike Johnson, I suppose, can breathe a sigh of relief this morning. The House of Representatives blocked a motion from Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene to vacate the Speaker from his role after weeks of threats from the conservative Republican. But an overwhelming number, really, of both Republicans and Democrats voted to kill the proposal. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles joins us now this morning with more. Hey, Ryan, good morning. So does this mean the threats to Johnson's job are over?
Yes, Savannah, it likely does, and that's because a wide range of members of Congress, both Republican and Democrat, made it clear they were no longer interested in putting the House of Representatives into a state of chaos. After weeks of posturing and threats, Marjorie Taylor Greene finally made her move and was met with a chorus of boos. The Republican firebrand, close with former President Trump, dramatically failed in her attempt to remove Speaker Mike Johnson from his post after an overwhelming number of Democrats voted with Republicans to block her effort. Democrats decided to bail Johnson out after the Speaker bucked conservatives like Greene and put funding for Ukraine on the floor. The still Speaker calling on his colleagues to turn the page.
Hopefully, this is the end of the personality politics and the frivolous character assassination that has defined the 118th Congress.
A message the vast majority of Republicans agree with.
And the reality of this is this is like the congressional version of a temper tantrum, and we continue to do it.
Even Trump pushed back against Greene, encouraging his supporters to defend Johnson. But the Georgia Congresswoman, even in defeat, found a way to claim victory.
This Republican Party is not ready, and they proved it today. As a matter of fact, they proved they're ready to do everything with the Democrats.
While the Democratic leader declaring that a small group of right-wing Republicans will no longer dominate the Congress.
We need more common sense and less chaos in Washington, D.C. Marjorie Taylor Greene and extreme MAGA Republicans are chaos agents. House Democrats are change agents.
And despite her embarrassing loss, Greene did not rule out bringing up another motion to vacate Johnson in the future. And Democrats have not promised to offer their support should she make that move again. But for now, Johnson's job is safe as he heads into an election season, hoping to hold on to the GOP majority in the House. Savannah?
All right, Ryan, thank you very much. Well, stay with us because there is much more to come here on Morning News. Now, later in the hour, risk or reward? Are all those convenient-seeming travel credit cards proving to be more trouble than they're actually worth? Well, the federal government wants to find out. We'll explain in a moment.
But first, a new push for reproductive rights coming from the White House, and it's being spearheaded by the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff. More on that next.
Welcome back. Abortion rights, of course, have become one of the most important issues for voters since the overturning of Roe v. Wade nearly 2 years ago now.
Second gentleman Doug Emhoff traveled to Georgia this week to hold an event aimed at focusing on mobilizing men to advocate for reproductive rights. NBC News Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor spoke exclusively with Mr. Emhoff and has more on the issue.
Good morning, Christine and Savannah. I sat down with second gentleman Doug Emhoff for an exclusive interview in Atlanta. He was there for a campaign event aimed at encouraging men to push to expand abortion rights. The visit came as a number of states have enacted new abortion restrictions, which have taken effect in the last few weeks, and as organizers on both sides of the issue are fighting over abortion ballot measures that will put the question to voters in November. Here's my report. It's a topic rarely discussed and one the second gentleman is focusing on, the role men can play in advocating for abortion rights.
It is a medical health care crisis.
On Tuesday, in an exclusive interview with NBC, Doug Emhoff said he wants men to see reproductive health care as an issue impacting the fundamental freedoms of everyone.
This is an issue of fairness to women. Women are dying. It's affecting men's ability to plan their lives. And it's also an issue of what's next, what other freedoms are at risk.
Emhoff spoke to NBC in Atlanta, where he convened a panel on the role men can play in pushing for abortion access. The event was timed to mark the 5th anniversary of Georgia's 6-week ban on most abortions.
Being in this position of being second gentleman and also being the first man ever to be in this role, it just would be wrong for me not to use this microphone to advocate for this issue.
What's your message to the many male lawmakers that we've seen be part of restricting abortion rights?
Stop it. Listen to the people in this country. See what's going on. Listen to doctors, listen to nurses, listen to men and women who are suffering because of those actions.
As part of his efforts, Emhoff said he's been talking to men across the country and in his personal life.
I'm talking about this with my other dad friends. I'm talking about it with my son, about how this is going to impact him and how he's going to start a family or not.
Tuesday's event was a collaboration between Emhoff and a group called Men for Choice, which has held other gatherings with the second gentleman. Cecil Price III is a Morehouse student and a member of Men for Choice.
It hurts me to see that potentially the rights of my sisters, of my mother, can be taken away. And I have a responsibility and a duty as a brother, but also as a leader, to advocate for them.
Meanwhile, several women, including Shawana Moore, said they welcomed men organizing around abortion.
We need all hands on deck.
Moore, a nurse, said her husband speaking up for her soon after she had their son saved her life.
I had to have emergency C-sections. I had too much bleeding and my blood pressure was basically plummeting. But it was my husband who really advocated for my health and well-being, and that's critical.
Meanwhile, like his wife, Vice President Kamala Harris, and President Biden, Emhoff pointedly criticized former President Trump and underscored what he believes is at stake in November.
This is a binary election. You've got the former president on one side who is celebrating the overturn of Roe v. Wade, saying women must be punished. And then on the other side, you've got Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who are on the right side of each and every one of these issues.
Now, I also spoke to the second gentleman about another key issue making headlines, the war between Israel and Hamas. Emhoff is the first Jewish spouse of a president or vice president, and he's been working to combat anti-Semitism and meeting with Jewish college students amid the pro-Palestinian protests that have really swept across campuses. He said it is okay for Americans to exercise their right to free speech and to have, quote, valid criticism of Israeli policies. But he said Jewish people, and really all people, should never be harassed and targeted because of their identities. And he added that President Biden and his wife, Vice President Kamala Harris, are working around the clock to bring the conflict to an end and to protect civilian lives in Gaza and to get the hostages held by Hamas released. Now, those comments come as President Biden just delivered a speech on anti-Semitism, and his administration is working alongside Arab leaders on a potential ceasefire deal. Christine, Savannah.
All right, Yamiche, great reporting, great interview with the second gentleman. Thank you so much.
Right, a new study this morning is raising concerns about the alarmingly high number of adults at risk for serious heart issues.
Yeah, according to research published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, nearly 90% of Americans over the age of 20 are in danger, just 20, wow, are in danger of developing heart disease.
Okay, that's a big number.
Yeah,
let's dig into this with NBC News medical contributor Dr. Tara Narula. She is a cardiologist at Lenox Hill Hospital at Northwell Health. 90%. So this is including a new kind of I guess, heart disease diagnosis. Why is this number so high? What does it say to you?
Well, this number isn't, I got to be honest, surprising to cardiologists. Okay. We see a lot of patients with a lot of these risk factors. But really what this study did is look at about 10,000 Americans, and they assessed them for something called cardio-kidney metabolic syndrome. This was really defined and published in the fall of 2023. And it's basically saying there is this link between organs, what happens in the kidneys, obesity, diabetes, and your risk for cardiovascular disease. And so, as you mentioned in the intro, about 90% of Americans in this study had stage 1 or higher cardio-kidney metabolic syndrome. They met that criteria. And actually only 18% of those who were in the ages of 20 to 44, so a younger population, were stage 0. So a lot of Americans really falling into this bucket. And 15% were in an advanced stage of cardio-kidney metabolic syndrome. So it's really just highlighting the fact that we need to do a better job in this country of screening people for risk factors and really working on prevention. We know that cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death for men and women in this country.
I mean, I have to say, I read this earlier, and even just as I said,
the age 20. I'm like, it's surprising me again. I mean, what do you make of how young you're seeing this?
So we know, for example, that coronary artery disease or buildup of plaque in the arteries starts as early as your late teen years. So these are processes in many cases that are happening from the time you are very young, which is why the American Heart Association and others recommend that we start screening for things like blood pressure starting at age 20. You start getting your cholesterol checked. You know your numbers. You know what your body mass index is. So these are really important things to start paying attention to in your 20s. So that by the time you are 40, 50, and 60, you're not experiencing events like heart attacks and strokes, really. So that's why we work on prevention to prevent the events from happening.
So the prevention. Dr. Narula, write us your prescription for how we can protect ourselves.
So it's, 80% of cardiovascular disease is preventable, and that's the good news, right? So the only thing that you cannot change is your age and family history. But so much of the other stuff, for example, yes, your, blood pressure. We know ways to control blood pressure, exercise, managing your diet, maintaining a healthy body weight, stopping smoking, not drinking too much alcohol, managing stress and mental health, your cholesterol. So all of these risk factors that when you sit down with a cardiologist and they go over that with you, that's in your control. So we need to empower patients to understand what their risk factors are and to give them the knowledge to know how to go about changing those risk factors.
Just because that number is so high, the percentage of people kind of in this risk factor zone, for viewers who are watching who are like, okay, whoa, I want to know if I'm there. I want to know if I can tweak. Is this something that you can get checked out? You can be proactive about finding out about?
Yes, right? That's the take home here. So if you go, for example, to sit with a cardiologist, they will look at the whole picture of you. They will look at all your risk factors. And we have something called a risk calculator. It is a score that we generate by putting in your age, whether you smoke, and some of your numbers. And we can tell you, for example, you are at a 10% risk of having a heart attack or stroke in the next 10 years. You're at a 20% risk. We also have really great screening tests now, something called a calcium score, for example, that I use very often, where we can check with a very quick CAT scan to look for early signs of heart disease. So we have a lot of tools at our disposal, but it really starts with sitting down with someone who can identify what your risk is and then hand you a prescription, as you said, for how to change your lifestyle.
Do you need to be referred for those types of tests?
So in some cases, the primary doctors can do the same thing. So if you have an internist and you say, I want to know what my cardiovascular risk is, they can look up on the internet. You yourself can. There's a risk score called Prevent and calculate your risk. And you can ask and say, can I get a calcium score? I want to be proactive. And then in some cases, seeing a cardiologist can be helpful as well.
Great information.
It really is.
Dr. Tara Narula, so nice to see you this morning. Thank you so much.
So much lately. I'm like, I got to go get a lot of tests.
All right, now to new details about a hearing in Washington on those all too tempting travel reward credit cards.
Yeah, this morning, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Transportation Department are going to hear from airlines, unions, and consumer advocates to see if those reward programs are actually working for those consumers. NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung has more for us. Hey, Brian, good morning.
Morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. Well, it's impossible to avoid, right? In the mail, at those kiosks at the airport, when you're sitting on the plane listening to those pre-flight announcements. We're talking about these offers for 40, 60, 100,000 bonus points just for signing up for a credit card. But consumers are saying they're getting caught up in a smoke and mirrors of confusing rules over how to use and redeem those points. And this morning, the government is listening. It's an offer that's hard to turn down, flipping those everyday purchases into your next getaway. But today, those airline credit cards deals are under scrutiny. Lauren Randall applied for an airline credit card after seeing a sign-up bonus offer for 40,000 points. Hours later, seeing another offer for 60,000.
It does kind of feel like a bait and switch.
She's one of the 41% of Americans with a travel rewards credit card, part of the booming economy for points, scoring flights that would otherwise have expensive price tags in dollars. Signing up for a card among one of the quickest ways to rack up points. But some consumers are finding the headache of accumulating and then redeeming points more trouble than it's worth. Federal regulators, including the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, are listening.
We've seen where consumers have had to run through an obstacle course to get the rewards that they were promised.
With annual fees as high as $650 and interest rates above the national average, airline cards this morning are the subject of a hearing to see if consumers are really coming out on top.
Credit card companies are charging huge interest rates, sometimes 30% or more. And many consumers actually lose out on these deals. They may be paying way more than the value of the awards that they accrue.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg saying the stakes are high with Americans valuing points like their savings.
But unlike your cash savings, a company can change the value of these points anytime for any reason.
Airlines, meanwhile, say that their partnerships with banks allow airlines to reward their most loyal customers. Randall says she was denied the extra point bonus on her new airline credit card.
The juice may not necessarily be worth the squeeze.
So the next time you see a bonus offer like I literally just did on my phone, a few tips for you. First off, try to set a limit on how much you're willing to budget for that annual fee. Try to shop around and see if there are better offers out there. And then lastly, try to use the card that has points for the airline you tend to fly the most. You want to be using those points where you're actually using them.
Yes, some of those rewards cards have like $400 annual fees.
Yeah.
You really have to be careful.
And then you have to actually, use the things that are going to get you that money back and request them and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Use a calculator.
Yeah. All right. Oh, math. Brian's going to make us do math.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, you two are good at that.
Good to see you. All right, coming up, crown on the ground.
Yeah, more trouble in the pageant world this morning. Miss Teen USA stepping down just days after Miss USA did the same thing. We're going to take you behind her stunning decision. That's all up next. Welcome back. For the first time in its 72-year history, the Miss USA pageant has neither a Miss USA or Miss Teen USA title holder.
Remarkable. The 17-year-old teen winner from New Jersey announced she is giving up her crown just days after Miss USA did the same.
Yeah, wow. NBC News entertainment correspondent Chloe Malas is following this story for us. Hey, Chloe, good morning.
Good morning, you guys. Miss Teen USA shocking the pageant world on Wednesday, saying that she no longer wants her title because the organization does not align with her values.
You can take your first walk as Miss Teen USA.
This morning, Miss Teen USA stunning the pageant world after giving up her title. 17-year-old Uma Sofia Srivastava, who made history as the first Mexican Indian American winner of the Miss Teen USA pageant, announcing the surprising news on Instagram, writing, "My personal values no longer fully align with the direction of the organization." The bombshell comes just 2 days after Miss USA Noelia Voigt announced her own resignation, with less than 6 months to go on her reign, citing mental health issues. Fellow pageant contestants speaking out, posting a joint statement of support for Voigt, saying that Voigt is under a non-disclosure agreement and asking the Miss USA organization to release her, adding, "We are asking for full transparency." Miss Maine Juliana Morehouse calling for the Miss USA organization to let Voigt's voice be heard.
She cannot speak on her experience as Miss USA.
There are signs that there might have been a conflict between Voigt and the Miss USA organization. A person close to her telling NBC News that the first letter of each sentence in her resignation post on Instagram spells out, "I am silenced." The CEO of the Miss USA organization responding to the resignations in a statement, writing in part, "I take these allegations seriously. The well-being of all individuals associated with Miss USA is my top priority."
When you have two national title holders stepping down, I just don't see that aligning.
An unprecedented situation, now tarnishing the crown of two of the country's most well-known pageants. It appears at least that Miss USA signed a non-disclosure agreement according to other contestants, which is a fairly common practice, but essentially handcuffs them, not allowing them to discuss exactly why they decided to call it quits. So we're going to have to wait and hear more details. I mean, listen, the fact that the two of them have both resigned within days of each other.
Yeah.
I mean, when you enter the pageant world, this is something that usually you've worked towards your
It's the brass
life,
ring. It's the brass ring, right?
And also, to have still 6 months left in your reign. And yes, there are NDAs and, maybe they can't speak freely right now about what's going on. But, a lot of people believe that there might be some sort of toxic culture in the organization. But the organization, like I said in my piece, says, listen, we take this stuff very seriously. That is, not true. But it's very vague on everybody's side. Nobody really knows what's going on, but very strange. Miss USA, Miss Teen USA, they both don't want their crowns anymore.
We'll wait to hear more.
Chloe Malas, we know you'll be following it. Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you so much. Well, let's actually stay on this. We're going to bring in psychotherapist Dr. Robbie Ludwig. Dr. Robbie, good morning. Always great to have you with us. So, I mean, as a mental health professional, what do you think, just generally, let's not talk specifically yet about this instance, but just the whole idea of pageant competitions. You think about competing in school, we talk a lot about social media creating a comparison trap, and this is sort of one of those things where that's exactly what you're doing. Is this harmful or helpful? What do you think?
Well, the studies show it can be both. For some, it can increase self-esteem because they're developing important aspects of who they are. But for others, it can be quite negative. In fact, there have been studies that show people in the pageant world tend to have lifelong eating disorders. It's this pressure to always measure up to an ideal, the thin ideal, to look good, to present good, to be perfect. And that can take a real toll on one's self-esteem because nobody could deal with that pressure 24/7. It's just not realistic.
You know, there's more to the pageants than just the stage competition, right?
Yeah.
These women, they're often traveling, they're doing speaking engagements, they're doing community outreach. Oma Safia, the now former Miss Teen USA, even wrote a multilingual children's book, and she's only in 11th grade.
She's amazing.
So how should winners approach their roles to make sure they have a positive experience?
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important to accept who they really are, to stay focused on what is their mission as a crown holder. It's to share their voice, be authentic, to think about the good that you can do for whatever topic you think is important to share, whether it's spreading education or information, and also to surround yourself with support systems, people who can build you up, because there's a toxic culture within the pageant world where people are willing to pull you down, and also the public can be very fickle and very tough. So to have your good people around you, maybe even a therapist, and to battle any of that negative feelings or ideas you have about yourself while you're fulfilling your mission.
So, Dr. Robbie, that's a great tip, having people around you to build you up. Certainly something that we need to continue breaking down the stigma on is reaching out for a therapist, seeking that actual professional help. But I'm wondering, any other tips you have? Because while most of us, right, are not pageant winners, a lot of us understand the pressure of feeling like you need to achieve so much, perfectionism, being on all the time. What else should people think about? What else can you give to people this morning to try to help them overcome those battles?
I think it's really about self-acceptance, really liking who you are and coming to terms with who you're not. I mean, when people feel loved, it's feeling love for who you are and who you're not, the whole package. And if we can give that to ourselves, and part of it is putting ourselves in an environment where the people around us have our back and are mirroring and reminding us of our strengths as we go through the challenging time of our lives.
Dr. Robbie, really important conversation. Good one that we can all relate to, pageant queens or not. Thank you very much for joining us. Coming up, new developments this morning in that Astro World crowd crush tragedy that took the lives of 10 people back in 2021.
After the break, the wrongful death lawsuits now being settled, and the family of a 9-year-old victim still holding out for justice. That's next on Morning News Now. We are learning this morning that nearly all of the wrongful death suits that followed that tragic crowd surge at the Astroworld Music Festival have been settled. This was the terrifying scene at the Travis Scott concert back in 2021, which led to the death of 10 people, the youngest a 9-year-old boy. The moment sparked hundreds of lawsuits and raised concerns about crowd safety at major concerts. NBC News correspondent Erin McLaughlin has more on the latest details.
9 out of 10 wrongful death lawsuits stemming from the deadly 2021 Astroworld concert have been settled out of court. According to a lawyer for concert promoter Live Nation, who said this in court, the families of those 10 victims suing after their loved ones died in a chaotic crowd crush in Houston, Texas. Scenes like this of thousands of concert goers stampeding, screaming for help, begging a cameraman to call for help, while superstar rapper Travis Scott kept performing, even as an ambulance tried to drive through the crowd. In the aftermath, Travis Scott heavily criticized for not stopping and calling for help, even facing a police investigation, but avoiding criminal charges after a grand jury declined to indict him.
I could never imagine anything like this.
Scott spoke out nearly a month after the disaster, saying he couldn't hear the cries for help, and last year telling GQ he was devastated. The tragic scenes followed by these moments from other singers, like singer SZA.
And it's important that we just make sure that they're okay.
Stopping a show just days later after a fan passed out.
Do we have an inhaler? Can we just grab one?
And Billie Eilish, pausing to get a fan and inhaler. In 2022, Scott launched an initiative, Project Heal, aiming to make event spaces safer. But that didn't impress the family of 9-year-old victim Ezra Blount, the youngest victim of the Astroworld concert, who called the move, quote, a PR stunt in an interview with the Rolling Stone. Blount's family is the only one of the 10 who haven't settled with the defendants, intending to go to trial. And even then, the legal saga is far from over for Astroworld's organizers. Around 2,400 injury cases are still pending, as those hurt and traumatized by the concert seek compensation and closure. All those who've been sued, including Travis Scott and Live Nation, have denied all claims, saying safety was their first concern and they couldn't foresee what happened.
All right, our thanks to Aaron McLaughlin for that report.
Well, the former translator for Los Angeles Dodgers star Shohei Ohtani will plead guilty to illegally transferring $17 million from the player's account without his knowledge. Ippei Mizuhara has admitted to single counts of bank fraud and subscribing to a false tax return. Prosecutors say he used the LA Dodgers star's money to pay off his own debts. Mizuhara is set to be arraigned in court next Tuesday and faces up to 33 years in jail.
All right, let's get to some financial headlines, starting with brand new employment numbers out this morning.
CNBC's Silvana Henao has that breaking news and some other headlines for us. Hey, Silvana, good morning.
Hey, Savannah. Hey, Christine. Good morning to you. Yeah, we are getting the latest snapshot on the state of the U.S. economy and the job market. Jobless claims actually coming in hotter than expected at 231,000 versus 214,000 expected. Now, that's the largest number since August, showing the labor market could be cooling. All right, some headlines for you. Nearly half of adults say money has a negative impact on their mental health, at least occasionally. A new report from Bankrate finds the top financial concern is inflation, followed by paying for everyday expenses such as groceries, not having enough emergency savings, and being in debt. Now, women are more likely than men to say money has a negative impact. Also, money worries appear to rise up until about age 60 and then fall off. And shares of Airbnb are under pressure after the vacation rental site forecasts sales this quarter that are below analysts' estimates. The company says that's because Easter fell in March this year. Airbnb says big events like the Olympics in Paris could help sales this summer. Travel demand is overall holding up, even as inflation remains stubborn. Airbnb is trying to expand overseas and make it easier for groups to book locations.
Interesting stuff. All right, yeah. Silvana, thank you so much.
You got it.
All right, coming up, it's a T-Swift takeover hitting the City of Light.
And the Swifties in Paris are ready for it. One big question, will she give the Tortured Poets Department its Eras Tour a debut? All that coming up next. We are back now with a really cool new image from space. Look at this. It appears to show, you can see it kind of on the left side of your screen, a ghost-like hand reaching across the universe and towards the Milky Way. God's hands, as it's being called. It's a type of dark nebula located 1,300 light years from Earth. Astronomers actually don't know why this rarely seen cosmic phenomenon looks the way that it does. The incredible photo was captured using a dark energy camera that is mounted at an observatory in Chile. A dark energy camera sounds Baltimore-ish or something.
Right, far out.
How cool is that? We love to bring you space news. Beautiful.
Taylor Swift's record-breaking Eras Tour restarts tonight after a break, beginning with 4 concerts in Paris.
Whew. And as the French capital gets ready to welcome her, fans are wondering how much of her new album will make it onto the set list. Here's NBC News correspondent Emily Aketa.
Hey there. Well, if there was ever any question of Swifties' loyalty, just look at the throngs of fans jumping across the pond to see Taylor Swift. In fact, up to 30% of ticket holders for the next 4 nights in Paris are American, according to the venue. And on the heels of her latest album drop, fans are anticipating plenty of surprises in store.
This morning, the City of Love is ready for Taylor Swift as she kicks off the European leg of her history-making Eras Tour in Paris.
Are you ready for it? We were in Paris.
Swifties congregating and warming up their vocals near famous landmarks in anticipation.
We were in Paris.
Texas natives Kathleen Smith and her daughter Kennedy skipping her college graduation to be here.
This is the trip of a lifetime.
Get tickets for Paris was nothing short of a miracle.
An estimated 20 to 30% of the fans set to file into Europe's largest indoor arena are American.
I'm a teacher, actually took off from school for the whole week to be here. So.
Packing hotels and restaurants, this weekend's tourism influx will test the city's infrastructure and security ahead of another major event this summer.
For 4 nights, we'll be the center of the world. It's a rehearsal for the Olympics, obviously.
Last year, the stunning demand for Eras Tour tickets in France forced Ticketmaster to pause sales.
I was so sad, so disappointed.
Our crew happened to run into that mega fan in Paris this week, who was excited to report she's since scored a seat.
And get to see it all firsthand on the first night. I'm sure she has so many surprises for us.
Tonight will mark the singer's first time performing since dropping the Tortured Poets Department, which broke vinyl sales and streaming records. Fans pointing to this never-before-seen white mic in rehearsal clips as a potential sign Swift could incorporate songs off the new album. As Swift's tour enters its next era.
And the French media is buzzing this morning with reports that her concert promoter in Paris says she will add songs from the new album to the tour. We reached out to Taylor's team, but have not heard back. By the way, some fans are saving money by going to Paris. On StubHub, some tickets for tonight's show are going for around $130. Her October 18th show in Miami, around $1,600. Keep in mind, France has stricter rules around ticket resales. All of that to say, why am I not in Paris right now? Back to you.
Exactly.
Ditto.
Oh, thank you
and
so
as
much,
you
Emily.
said, saving. We're saving money. We're spending.
Yeah, that's a good
maybe
financial move.
cheaper than they were, you know, in one of our major cities here, but not saving.
You got to spend money to save money sometimes. That's what they're doing.
You said that's not what we do.
Only for T Swift. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
Don't go anywhere, though, because the news continues on Morning News Now right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.